Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
Lifebuoy shampoo ලේති කිරි ප්‍රෝටීන් සහ මල්ටිවිටමින් හිස කෙස් මුල සිට පෝෂණය කර ශක්තිමත් කරයි.
In your headlines tonight, the sinking ship. Steps will be taken through a formal plan to revive the Sri Lankan tea industry, pledges President Ranil Wickremesinghe. Also expects interest rates to reduce early next year.
I have taken over the Titanic after it hit the iceberg.
New threat. Sri Lankan exporters to face new challenges with a German legislation going into force, threatening to push Sri Lankan exporters from doing business.
There is a need for the small and medium companies, particularly to have some support in training, in making sure that they have the right documentation to cover what processes they are currently doing right through the supply chain.
Slowing down. Sri Lanka's inflation eases for the first time this year, with October inflation down by 3.8 percentage points. All this and much more coming up tonight, this Monday, the 31st of October 2022.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, you're joining us on First at 9. I'm Anuradhi Wickremesinghe. President Ranil Wickremesinghe assures that measures will be taken through a formal plan to revive the Sri Lankan tea industry, an important step in the journey towards an export economy. Addressing the Sri Lanka Tea Factory Owners Association, President Wickremesinghe said Sri Lanka could expect a reduction in the interest rates by March next year.
The 32nd annual general meeting of the Sri Lanka Tea Factory Owners Association was held yesterday under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe.
I was listening to the report by your president, a survey of the tea industry today. He came out with his tale of woes. That is understandable, looking at what we have gone through this year. Now is my chance to come out with my tale of woe, because I have taken over the Titanic after it hit the iceberg. So you can just imagine from where I have to start. Everything was down. We had declared ourselves bankrupt. How do we restart it? That's what we are engaged. And I thought I'll explain to you the process. First and foremost, we had to conserve whatever foreign exchange we had and limit the import so that we could get fuel and we could get fertilizer and medicine. It hasn't worked fully initially, but now it's working much better. Now that we had declared ourselves bankrupt, the first issue was to ensure that the world will now accept us, that we have taken sufficient steps to wipe out the label of bankrupt. We have to get through this year and then go into next year. We have to manage really 2 years. So we had to first come to an arrangement, which meant raising money. To raise that money, we had to tax everything, which also meant the agriculture. As someone said, if it moves, tax it. We had to come to that level. But we had no other way out. So the first issue is to ensure that we can restructure bankruptcy. So we have to start talks with our creditors. I've already started discussions with Japan and now with India and China. If we can come to an agreement by December, which means coming to an agreement by mid-November and going up to the IMF board mid-December, we'll gain a big advantage. In the meantime, we have started receiving assistance from many organizations. Some countries have given us, others through the different organizations. We get a good maha crop by March, April next year. That will help to stabilize the economy. In the meantime, once we get the agreement, other countries will come to help us. The governor of the central bank has informed us that our inflation is peaking. So by about February, March, that we can see the reduction of interest rates, if not earlier. And if we take all these measures, by mid-year, we'll be able to give relief on the interest rates. We want the tea industry to develop. Next year, we have to come through agriculture production. That's what we have to do. We come back to you. But you have a lot of things we know. You need fertilizer. Most of the major issue is that we need replanting. We are suffering because we have not replanted. As a result, our crop per hectare is coming down. Vietnam is overtaking us. Whoever thought that Vietnam will be growing tea? That's the position. So we are looking at an agriculture modernization program in which tea will have a big place. Very competitive tea industry we have to have, and we have to develop, and I think we have to go for quality tea.
On futuristic basis, we must ensure that we add more value to our products, and also we should encourage our growers to grow more. In that regard, we have conducted the 1000 nursery program with the help of the tea board, which came to a very decent level. Now we conduct again with the support of the TSHT and the TRI. We are trying to improve the leaf quality. Last year we didn't push that much because of the backdrop of this fertilizer fears, but it's a mandatory requirement that we go ahead and ensure that we produce better quality tea, because we can't compete with the quantity in relation to Kenya, India, China and the major countries that produce more tea than that we produce. And also we explore more export markets. We were concentrating in turbulent regions, possibly with the help of the tea board. Spoken specifically that matter to the chairman of the tea board. Let us concentrate more on other European countries and also Americas and non-explored markets to ensure that we capture more markets in time to come. So for that, whatever the assistance that you require from the plantation ministry and also all the other organizations under its umbrella, we are fully committed to provide whatever the assistance that you require. Even though it's turbulent times, we hope that together we can do much better. Let us work together to ensure that Sri Lankan tea, much famous Ceylon tea, remains at a higher level in the world market.
The Sri Lankan export sector, still reeling from the effects of economic crisis, is about to face a new challenge, with the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act threatening to push Sri Lankan exporters from doing business in Germany. Although large-scale Sri Lankan exporters are equipped to mitigate any challenges, the Act will impact the smaller Sri Lankan exporters disproportionately. The Act will be effective from January 2023.
On the 22nd of July last year, an Act on Corporate Due Diligence in Supply Chains was published in the German Federal Law Gazette. The Act will enter into force on the 1st of January next year, with the objective of safeguarding human rights and environment in the global economy more effectively. It obligates German companies with more than 3,000 employees to take appropriate measures to respect human rights and the environment within their supply chain. However, the regulatory burden on complying with the new Act may create challenges to the smaller Sri Lankan exporters who happen to be a part of the supply chains of the impacted German companies. Those Sri Lankan exporters may see their business relationships with German companies terminated next year if they aren't able to comply with the new rules. Speaking to AdaDerana, the Secretary General of the Joint Apparel Association Forum, Johan Lawrence, shared his thoughts on how Sri Lankan exporters can face the new challenge.
Sri Lanka can face this. We have advanced systems in place, particularly in the bigger companies, that will have the required tracking in place to make sure that we can prove that through the supply chain there is a process of due diligence that happens. We believe that even in the small and medium companies this is in place, but what is likely to be lacking is the documentation in terms of particularly things like risk analysis processes. This is why we feel that there is a need for the small and medium companies particularly to have some support in training, in making sure that they have the right documentation to cover what processes they are currently doing right through the supply chain.
Sri Lanka's inflation eased for the first time this year, with the Colombo Consumer Price Index slowing down to 66% in October. That's down from 69.8% in September. According to the Department of Census and Statistics, food inflation in Colombo decreased to 85.6% this month from 94.9% in September.
In its latest data on inflation, the statistics office showed that Sri Lanka's key inflation rate slowed to 66% in October, a 3.8% reduction compared to 69.8% rate of inflation recorded in September. This is the first time this year that the rate of inflation slowed after costs soared and prices jumped since earlier in 2022. The Statistics Department said year-on-year inflation for the food group decreased to 85.6% this month from 94.9% in September, while the non-food group inflation saw a reduction to 56.3% from 57.6% in September. Also for the month of October, a year-on-year basis contribution to inflation by food commodities was 28.09%. The contribution of non-food items, meanwhile, was 37.85%, mainly due to the increases in value change in groups such as transport amounting to 13.28%, 7.71% from housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels, and 4.88% from restaurants and hotels.
Minister of Education Dr. Susil Premajayantha says the education system in Sri Lanka needs to be transformed since it has not undergone any change for the last 75 years. Addressing an event in Colombo yesterday, Dr. Premajayantha said Sri Lanka has to achieve the fourth goal of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is quality of education and education for all.
We have to transform the education. Day before yesterday, on Friday, I received the latest report of the UNESCO. As Sri Lankans, after 1946, the introduction of independent education bill in State Council at that time, over 75 years, we have not changed our education system drastically. We have inherited this system from Britishers. But even in Britain, you don't find the same system that they are experiencing in their country. I have visited primary schools, junior secondary and senior secondary schools in London while attending Education Ministers Conference of Commonwealth countries in 2007, 8, 9, 3 consecutive years. Now here in Sri Lanka we have 4.1 million student population in public schools, private schools and international schools, somewhere around 150,000 to 200,000. So we have 17 state universities. There are institutions affiliated to foreign universities. So it is high time to transform the education. We were talking about reforming education. After attending UNESCO Ministers Conference 2 months ago, I decided to drop the word reforming. Because UNESCO now, they are introducing transformation of education and digitalization of education. So by 2030, all the member countries of United Nations, we have to achieve the goals of SDG. So what is the goal for education? That is goal number 4, quality education and education for all. Only 7 years left for us to achieve goals. So transformation education is not an easy thing. So it will take at least 5 to 10 years to my knowledge with experience. After 2024, there will be no diplomats recruited to teaching profession in public schools. I am going to upgrade all the 19 colleges of education to faculties and there will be a National University of Education in Sri Lanka.
Speaker of Parliament Mahinda Yaba Abeyewardena endorsed the certificate on the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution Bill passed by a special majority in Parliament recently. Accordingly, the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution comes into force as the 21st Amendment to the Constitution effective today. The bill of the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution was presented to Parliament by Justice and Constitutional Reforms Minister Dr. Vijaydasu Rajapaksa on the 10th of August. Subsequently, according to a Supreme Court determination following petitions against the bill, amendments were made at the Ministerial Consultative Committee on Judicial Affairs. On the 20th and 21st of October, the parliamentary debate on the second reading of the 22nd Amendment was held, following which 179 votes were received in favour and 1 vote against. The voting after the third reading recorded 174 votes in favour and 1 against. The Sultanate of Oman, represented by the Oman Charitable Organization, announced a medical aid flight to Sri Lanka recently. According to the Oman Embassy in Colombo, the handover ceremony was attended by the Sri Lankan Minister of Health Kehelia Rambukwella, Under Secretary and First Secretary Saeed bin Ali Al Harbi, Deputy of Mission at the Ministry of Health in Colombo. This donation comes after a donation of essential medical supplies worth 18 billion Sri Lankan rupees by China last week. Sri Lanka relies on imports for about 85% of pharmaceutical needs and about 80% of medical supplies. The country imported $815 million in medicine in 2021, but by May had only about $25 million in foreign reserves to pay for imports of any kind. A dedicated website was launched by the Ministries of Transport and Energy to register passenger transport three-wheelers in the Western Province for the increased quota of fuel. State Minister of Transport Lasantha Aliagayawana said that the current fuel quota of 5 litres will be increased to 10 litres for passenger transport three-wheelers registered through this system. The program will be initially implemented in the Western Province and will be then extended to the other provinces in due time. Accordingly, passenger transport three-wheeler drivers can register for this through their website www.ptaxi.lk and following the steps below. Let's go in for a short commercial break. More news on the other side.
අයිනෝ රයිනෝ පුතා හැබැයි යා ගෙදර නිදියන්නෙම අමුතු තැනක. කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වාලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම. Rhino Cement Roofing Sheets. Then you know Rhino. I know.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Business sentiment in Sri Lanka has picked up according to the LMD Nielsen IQ Business Confidence Index. The survey showed Sri Lanka's business confidence climbing 13 basis points to 89 in October. In September, the index stood at 76, down 5 basis points from August's 81. The survey went on to highlight that this result only provides slight comfort to the ailing local economy, with 2 in 5 households in the country being poorly nourished.
The LMD Nielsen IQ Business Confidence Index showed a 13 basis point climb in October to 89 compared to 76 in September. However, a cautious optimism was advised given the backdrop of a host of macroeconomic issues still plaguing the country. Even though fuel supplies have improved and a better consciousness is emerging with regard to consumption, the new utilities tariffs and tax rates have kicked in and left both businesses and the people in dire straits. The magazine went on to highlight that there is uncertainty with the Ukraine-Russia conflict showing no sign of winding down, which poses a perilous threat to Sri Lanka and the world at large. Inflation continues to preoccupy business people along with the forex crisis and other heavy burdens such as taxation, interest rates and debt repayments, while the real value of disposable income diminishes for ordinary citizens. In terms of projections, dealing with the IMF will bring some respite. The debt restructuring process that is underway together with seeking new sources of funding and investment will be key to Sri Lanka's immediate future. LMD also concluded that it is unlikely the index will gain too much ground, if at all, in the near term.
According to the All Ceylon Bakery Owners Association, the price of a 450-gram loaf of bread will be reduced by 10 rupees with effect from midnight today. Meanwhile, the association said that the price of other bakery products will also be slashed by 10 rupees. Prices increased from June this year, and a loaf of bread weighing 450 grams was even sold at 300 rupees. With food inflation reaching unprecedented levels in the recent past since June, however, with today's downward reduction, prices of all bakery items are expected to come down. The Colombo Stock Exchange main index closed in negative territory as a result of price losses in counters such as Expo Lanka Holdings, Richard Pearce and Company and Valuable One, with the turnover crossing 1 billion rupees. A similar behavior was witnessed in the more liquid S&P SL20. High net worth and institutional investor participation was noted in John Keel's Holdings, while mixed interest was observed in Expo Lanka Holdings, Lanka IOC and Hemas Holdings. The transportation sector was the top contributor to market turnover, whilst the sector index lost 6.81%. Capital goods sector was the second highest contributor to the market turnover, as the sector index decreased by 1.55%. Foreign participation in market activity remained at subdued levels, with foreigners closing as net buyers. During the month, the ASPI and the S&P SL20 dropped by 13.4% and 18.2% respectively, while holding an average daily turnover of 2.09 billion rupees. And that's tonight's edition of First at 9. Join us again tomorrow at the same time. Stay tuned for World News Tonight, coming up next with Danidu Vithanosam. Have a good night.